All right, guys. Sorry about that. It's a little late, obviously. Wow. Whew. Um, but yeah, so it's a little late again. Still trying to figure things out. I know it's late over here in the East Coast where I'm at. Paul Greene-Dennis here, aka DJ. Well, Deep Green VO, Deep Green in general. And I said I was gonna watch the movie Queen of the Ring, and which I did earlier. And glad I did because I actually really liked the movie itself, which basically Queen of the Ring, if I'm not mistaken, took place in I want to say it took place mostly in Kentucky, and it's a really good documentary. It comes through the view of the lens of Mildred Burke, the one of the very first few women's wrestlers, but more so it was her through Mildred Burke who this story is told through the lens of, and how she revolutionized women's wrestling, especially in a time, there's the 1940s and 50s, in which this all takes place, in which women were still banned from getting into the ring in wrestling. They were banned, especially in California, in New York, and I know especially in California where the National Wrestling Association was it National Association let me just double check that I got everything right. The National Wrestling Alliance, or if I'm not mistaken, just want to double check. Hold on. The National Wrestling Alliance, which was basically the alliance of all the wrestling territories before it became monopolized by the WWF/WWE in the 1980s by Vince McMahon. But before that, it was the territories in the prior to that, and there's a governing body, the National Wrestling Alliance, and especially in California and New York, they were like hell no to when women get into the ring. They don't make no money. We don't believe in them making money. They're great fans, but they don't make no money. And so it was told through the lens of Mildred Burke, who was like the face of women's wrestling. And I say overall, the movie was really good in how it told like what Mildred Burke and the women that she worked with, what they had to go through in the 40s and the 50s just to deal with being a, a woman, just to deal being a woman and trying to break through in wrestling. And especially the commissioner was like, we cannot have no women in wrestling, which Jim Cornette played his role perfectly. And you could not have gotten a better. The casting was really good, for starters. The casting was awesome for this movie. Emily Bett Rickards as Mildred Burke. For those who don't know Emily Bett Rickards, you could think her role as Felicity Smoke, Arrow's girlfriend in the Arrowverse, in the CW Arrowverse series. She was Arrow's girlfriend. Well, his love, his interest. And then you had and a couple of also wrestlers too, which I really liked that. They didn't just have like great actresses and actors portraying wrestlers. They had like you got legit wrestlers, superstar wrestlers in here. Obviously, Jim Cornette, the wrestling historian himself. For those who don't know Jim Cornette / Corny, he is like the best way to describe it. He's a Bible of wrestling. To to understand who he is. He's like basically the wrestling Bible, a wrestling historian. Not just self-proclaimed, he is legit, the legit wrestling historian himself, personally. I'm one of the very few. And it's not just him. You actually had Naomi was in this movie. Yeah, that's right. Badass Naomi was in this movie as Ethel Johnson. You had Damaris Lewis as Babs Wingo. You had I think where is she at? I want to double check if I get them. I want to make sure I get these names right. I want to say it's Kelly Berglund. Yep, Kelly Berglund as Nell Stewart. And by the way, Kelly Berglund, who's also been a great actress who's done wrestling roles before in the show Heels with Stephen Amell, although I've had some issues with Stephen Amell, and especially Stance on the Strike. But that's neither here nor there. You had Mickey James as Fabulous Moolah, Britt Baker, Tony Storm, Camille. So you actually did have legit wrestlers who not just they were just great in the movie because they actually fucking wrestle. So the casting was right for the characters they needed to portray. Obviously Jim Cornette, but also Jim Ross, who him and Jim Cornette are great friends. He was the director of the movie, so you already had like wrestling royalty directing and overseeing this movie on top of Ash Advildsen, who's the head director, and he said, I'm gonna bring in legit wrestling historians and like royalty like Jim Cornette, Jim Ross, to like really make sure this is right. And you got the casting was just perfect. It was just beautiful. And especially what it did for it made sure that everything that was told right in the movie. And especially I like the fact that obviously they legit wrestled. That's obvious. And there's some really good wrestling too, actually, believe it or not. Some of it's better than the actual wrestling and certain talents. But that's neither here nor there either. and I think it made sense for Emily Bett Rickards to portray the role of Mildred Burke. I'm pretty sure there are others, but considering that Emily Bett Rickards has done this type of stuff before, like especially in Arrow, where there's a bunch of stunts that had to be done. I know she's had to do her fair share of stunts. And she looked like she was in shape to do what she needed to do in taking those bumps in this movie. She did her, she played, Emily Bett Rickards was right. Everybody was right for their role, for the acting and the characters. But more importantly, what the movie did highlight is that what the women, especially Mildred Burke, and everybody who wanted to come up in women's wrestling, what they had to go through. Skeptics, the opponents, and they had to defy the system that was intent on shutting women out of wrestling, having them in the ring, not just in wrestling, but making sure they would never enter the ring because it's just like we don't want to see that. We want to see strong dudes, but it's just like wrestling is about the story. It ain't about like, yeah, there are still, I'll be honest, there are still certain people who have their own biases about you have to have a certain look. You can't look tiny or whatever. You have to have a look about you. What we want, the prototypes, big, strong, lean, like, kind of like your superstar Billy Grahams. Or the Hulk Hogan's at one point. Or even if you didn't have those bodies, you just had to have some type of imposing presence to wrestle. And it's about Mildred Burke and her perseverance that she needed. And to lead not just her, but the women that were coming up under her. Some of the women that wanted to take her spot, take her out, Camille, June Byard, who was portrayed by Camille, who was like, screw this. Fuck going with the rules. Fuck that. That ain't how we got to get by. And Mildred's like, yeah, I got to get some grit because she had to, an assistant that wanted to keep him out from the guy who she got introduced into the business to, I think Bill Wolf, who was her manager, who didn't even want her in the ring because, again, why we want women in the ring? And it's like, ooh, I see something there. It wasn't just like he saw something in there. It's like, yeah, I want to get in with you because, it's the 50s and the 40s. Like, yeah, you're great in the ring, but let's trade it off with some favors. I don't like you, but you look good. You getting with me like this in the bedroom, and I'm going to get it on with you. And they use this system like that to gain their favors, to push it forward for their own agendas and whatnot. And there was so much between the NWA commissioner, Jim Cornette's like, no, we don't want to see this. Like, he had to be beat over the head, like, to make their point, to make Mildred and the other women's point. Like, we can't just do this in the ring, but the whole world is against us. We need to persevere, not just in the ring. We need to carry that and not lose ourselves outside of the ring, which is where the main point of this battle takes place. It's more so outside of the ring. Like, okay, you proving your point inside the ring, just despite people just don't want to see you. Okay, now we gotta keep that same energy going outside of the ring. And especially if you're a woman, it's more so against you, and the system is already against you to not be in this business. So now you got that going on. And they don't want you in there. So the odds are already stacked against you. And especially at one point, Billy Wolf, Mildred's manager, and not the manager of his promotion and whatnot, he was the head manager of the promotion in which gave Mildred a chance, has a drinking/temperament problem in which he's very insecure because as great as, I mean, he was nice, but he wasn't Mildred nice, and the other women that were coming up behind him nice. And now he had that going on. And he was like, you know what? I'm going to still give these women a chance. You proved me wrong. But what he was doing, he was currying favors for the power to prove that point, to keep that system in place against the women, despite the women being better than him in wrestling. To the point where he played too many games with Mildred and the other women in the promotion, and some of the women had agendas against Mildred and the other women. I'm going to say June Byard, but I don't want to give the movie away too much because that would be a bad disservice, to give the movie too much of the movie away. And thank you, Rasheen. Thank you, Rasheen. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. But yeah, Billy himself at one point had too much going on. Like, he was not faithful to his women. And the business itself at one point was very carny, because I don't know if the movie does take place starting in the promotions, they were in the carnivals and whatnot. So it's a very carny business. And if you watch wrestling, it still has a lot of carny aspects. So it's interesting to see that as well. And but yeah, it's a very, very, very insightful movie. And well played, well for a documentary, it truly gets the job done and it gets the point across. And I think it's a movie worth watching from the emotional aspect. And especially like even back then, wrestling back then, it was just like, wow. That was some good wrestling. Even the movie and stuff, like you got I'm gonna be honest. There was some better matches in the movie itself than the actual current product of some of these wrestlers. I'm gonna keep that buck. And they got some damn good wrestlers who actually know how to wrestle in this movie. Again, Naomi, Camille. I don't know what's happening to Camille in AEW. I don't know what's going on. But she did her part perfectly. She a big woman, Camille. Tony Storm. Mil Mickey James. Mickey James. Who else? Obviously, Jim Cornette being the wrestling historian himself, Jim Cornette. And obviously, Emily Beck Rickards, she was phenomenal. Kelly Berglund, who's shown wrestling chops as an actor from her for her character work, for the work she did in the TV series Heels, which is an incredible series. Also check that out as well. And who else? Yeah. Actually, let me just double check I missed anybody. Damaris Davis too as well. I said, yep. And Walter Goggins, a beast of an actor. Overall, the movie was really well done. If you like wrestling and you want to watch wrestling history as a documentary done right without no bullshit or anything, I would recommend this movie. I actually would recommend this movie. It was that good. If you don't want to check out a documentary, that's fine. Fine. But I would personally give this movie a double thumbs up. I think it did a really good job. Jim Ross and the minds behind this movie, more importantly, I think this is what made the vision of what they wanted to get across for this documentary was well received. Jim Ross, Jim Cornette. And I know there were others who were the head of all of this. I know there were others who were ahead of this. Yeah, Jim Ross was the executive producer of the film. And it made sense it took place in Louisville, Kentucky, for the most part. And interestingly enough, I'm not a fan of her as a wrestler. Well, she's a great wrestler. Let me take that back. She's a great wrestler. I'm just not a fan of her. That's just how she operates. Charlotte Flair and Liv Morgan were supposed to be in this movie, but they couldn't because of engagements and whatnot, injuries and other engagements. But I think overall, with who they had, they got the right cast. So, ladies and gentlemen, that is my review for Queen of the Ring. I'll try not to do these streams so late at night, but I figured why not. So, have a good night, get some sleep, and if you're on the West Coast, it ain't so late, but still, have a good night. Deep Green out.